It's time.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, to another episode of All the Above. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jeffrey Garrett, along with
Manuel Rustin, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to hit that subscribe button. We greatly appreciate it. If you're listening to us on the go, listening to the podcast version, thank you for doing that. Please remember to hit the follow button because these episodes are going to start coming at you with a little more speed, a little more regularity, so you don't want to miss anything. So remember to follow, and again, thank you for tuning in.
All right, folks, we have another great episode for you today. And in our main segment, we're going to get into a really interesting topic. Manuel here is going to tell us about some students who have ghosted him. Maybe we're applying too much pressure to some of our kids about succeeding and getting into competitive colleges. So fascinating topic. Stay tuned. We're going to get into that. But first, we launch with our Do Now.
All right, folks, now it's time for a segment that we call the Do Now, where we take a look at recent headlines in education. Jeff, how are we doing the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, since reading is fundamental and literacy is the backbone to all learning, we are going to dive into some key vocabulary in today's lexicon.
Okay, lexicon, I like that.
Yeah. So our first term up today, Manuel, is inflation.
Inflation, all right. I teach economics. That's the gradual increase in the price of goods and services over time.
That is a true definition for inflation, but not the one we were looking for. We are talking about grade inflation. Now, according to a new report from the conservative education think tank, the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, we have a national problem with grade inflation. They had some really interesting statistics to come out in this recent report. So 90% of American parents believe their child is performing at or above grade level, and 85% say their kid is on track for college success. However, only about 40% of high school graduates nationally are ready to enter into college classes without needing any type of remediation. This would be at four-year institutions. Moreover, about 1/3 of the students that they sampled who scored a B as their end-of-course grade scored proficient on end-of-class exams. So that means 2/3 of the kids who got a B did not score proficient on the end-of-class exam. So some reason for concern here, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, grade inflation, like you just said, you got to be in algebra, but you couldn't score proficient on the exam. And, we could question whether or not the exam, those end-of-course exams are accurate measures of a student's grasp of the content and the material. But in general, like if you got a high score a high grade in the class, you would think that would also include, that would also mean that you could score well on the test. I think this is one of the reasons why grades have become so controversial in teaching circles. There's debates over whether or not a student should get a 0 for a missed assignment versus getting 50% for a missed assignment because of mathematics of how a 4-point grading system works. There's a lot of teachers out there who are trying to convert to a gradeless system where the grades are based on mastery of content. One teacher that comes to mind who's doing that and who's posted quite a bit about that, her name's Alicia Jo Hall, and her website, she has a little bit of reflection of her transition away from percentages and points in the grade book. But in general, this is really concerning to me, being that the study found that this is most prominent in affluent communities. Because as a teacher who works with predominantly students of color and marginalized populations, I don't want to be holding their feet to the fire when it comes to your grade reflecting your mastery on the test. But if I'm not doing that, but in an affluent community, the parents are hounding the teachers and perhaps pressuring them into making sure that student gets an A or B, that could be an unfair advantage. So it's definitely concerning.
Yeah, agreed. This also is not just a problem at the high school level. Their study showed that at the college level, we're seeing the same thing. So in colleges today, the most common grade that's issued in all courses is an A, when back in the 1960s, A's made up 15% of all grades, right? So we've seen just objectively massive grade inflation there. And, there is this issue still of grades being pretty well correlated with long-term academic success, with GPA being well correlated with long-term success in college. So, there's reason for concern, but maybe it's not as big of a deal as we think. It's a bit complicated, but interesting data to grapple with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so time for our next word. Our next word for today's lexicon is penalty.
penalty, like fouling someone in soccer and then you get the cool free kick where you bend it like Beckham?
No, not that, actually. Penalty as in the teacher wage penalty. So it's common knowledge that by entering the teaching profession, you're sacrificing a little bit on the wage compensation level. So a new study came out by the Economic Policy Institute that looked at what they call the teacher wage penalty, which is the amount of compensation a teacher gives up by entering the teaching profession versus entering another profession that they are qualified for. And the Economic Policy Institute found that relative teacher pay has been eroding for over half a century. So the average weekly wages of public school teachers, adjusted for inflation, have decreased $27 a week from 1996 until today. Whereas, in contrast, weekly wages of other college graduates rose $137 a week over that same period. So in other words, teachers are gradually being paid less per week for equal work that other college graduates are getting paid more per week for. So this wage penalty essentially was 1.8% in 1994, meaning in 1994, if you're a teacher, you are earning about 1.8% less per week than another college graduate. However, now it's 18.7% less. What's going on here?
Yeah, I'm going to borrow one of your sayings from a previous episode, and this is one of these topics that just grinds my gears, okay? We've talked about this on a few different occasions with teachers in general, with preschool educators. We've talked about this through the lens of the strikes in West Virginia and Oklahoma and Arizona. Just like this data speaks so compellingly to the fact that we underpay our teachers. We underpay our teachers in terms of the standard of living we would hope and expect for someone to be able to afford by having, done well and gotten a bachelor's and a master's and being a professional, but also from the standpoint of how they're doing relative to their peers in other professions. So this just strikes me as such concrete proof that we like to say one thing about valuing educators and we do something very different. So it angers me because what are we saying about the value of our children and what we want to invest in and what's important in our society if we're not paying our teachers well? I don't need our teachers to be rich and flying around private planes and helicopters, but folks should not have to work second jobs to buy groceries or to, take a vacation once a year, right? So, the hopeful thing about this perhaps is that with some of the strikes that have happened nationally, with some of the growing attention on this matter, public perception and attitude seem to be shifting towards acceptance that this is real and this is something we need to change. So maybe a sign for hope, but my gears are grinding right now. This is unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm concerned for the future of the profession in the sense that if the weekly wages of teachers are trending down since the 90s and weekly wages for other college graduates are trending way up, why would I, if I'm a college student right now, why would I really consider teaching if the long-term outlook might be particularly negative? But like you said, hopefully things are moving in the right direction after these strikes and public perception and sort of discussion about teacher compensation.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. All right, on to our final lexicon term of the day. Manuel, this term's a little bit complicated, is capricious.
Capricious. So sticking with the soccer theme, capricious as in like a ref that's out there making just arbitrary and really damaging calls for a game.
Close. We're talking about capricious as in a federal judge's ruling that Betsy DeVos's recent attempt to prevent students defrauded by for-profit colleges from accessing loan forgiveness was, quote, unlawful, arbitrary, and capricious. Now, in case you haven't seen this in the news, during the Obama administration, there was a new regulation passed called Borrower Defense to Repayment, which essentially said that students who had been defrauded by some of these for-profit colleges, the biggest ones that you probably have seen commercials for and heard of include ITT Technical Institute and Corinthian College, which both went bankrupt, and left all their students high and dry with mounds of debt. All of that debt, or almost all of that debt, was federal loans, So these are taxpayer-funded subsidies to these for-profit companies that then left folks with no degree, no transferable credits, nothing, So we passed this regulation to say folks can apply to the government to say they were defrauded, and they can get loan forgiveness, There was about $13 billion in loan forgiveness available to these students. Betsy DeVos and company want to make it very difficult for students to access this. So making the burden of proof on the student to show that the university intentionally defrauded them in order to receive these funds. So, I know Betsy's your girl, and, what the heck is going on here, man?
First of all, I'm shocked that we are on to season 2 of All the Above, and Betsy DeVos is still in office, still in her position, because there was a time where we thought that she's not going to make it beyond a month or two, and here we are, our second season, and she's still there. I'm not surprised by this at all. These for-profit colleges are largely predatory in their practices, or have been largely predatory in their practices, especially when it comes to low-income and marginalized students who are really just seeking any opportunity they can to support themselves and their families and have a bright future. And oftentimes these for-profit colleges basically wine and dine them with promises of these great careers and salary and this and that, and they take out these loans. And to hear that DeVos is on the side of these predators makes sense, because her and her family, being the billionaires that they are, that's their circle. Their circle are these big for-profit entities, and it doesn't surprise me in the least that she's on their side more than the side of the average American student who has been defrauded by these colleges. Is incredibly troubling. It's not surprising in the least. It's capricious for sure in terms of their just the way they've been maneuvering this. I don't know. I mean, I wish I saw a beacon of hope. I wish I saw this going in a different direction. I mean, it's promising that a federal judge stepped in and called her out for this. But, we'll see what the long-term consequences are. I mean, here we are, these people are what are their credit scores looking like? What are their financial opportunities looking like in terms of trying to advance in their own lives? I mean, these are students who are growing older and older, and, this is still unsettled business.
Yeah, and to that point, most of the students who attend these universities tend to be older, tend to be parents, tend to be women, tend to be people of color, right? So we're talking about folks who are really working hard to get ahead, who frankly represent some of the most economically or politically marginalized folks in our society, and this is just a naked attempt to do harm to that group.
Hello there. You're probably wondering why your video stopped. Well, we had the audacity to have this story about Betsy and record it without thinking that perhaps there'd be an update before we even had time to edit and post it. Jeff, there's an important update. What's going on?
First thing is, she's like a cartoon villain, man. It's like Skeletor. Like every episode, there's some new terrible thing to talk about. So the important update is, since November, when she was ruled by a federal judge to implement the loan borrower defense rule and see immediate relief for the hundreds of thousands of students who've been defrauded by for-profit colleges, Betsy DeVos has failed to implement the judge's rule. So she's now being sued again to force immediate implementation of this. And just to give you a sense of the scope, this means that about $250 million in loans should be discharged right now to over 165,000 students who've made claims under this federal rule. Now, this not only includes cancellation of debt, it also includes borrowers being reimbursed for past payments and for their adverse credit history to be repaired. So stay tuned for more. I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Hit the website for all the links. Back to the show.
So, elections matter. And a lot of times, the news and the hype is all about the presidency and all about, these things that are far away in Washington. And they don't get to the fact that, like, your loan bill that comes in the mail at the end of every month, right? Mm-hmm. Elections have consequences on that, right? It's very personal very quickly when you dig into the policy. And I'm glad to see that this judge put a stop to Betsy and company striking this blow at folks and protecting these crazy for-profit institutions.
Yeah, but I mean, the truth of the matter is, even if and when Betsy, steps away from her position under this administration, whoever replaces her is going to be of the same ilk and same mindset. So, like you said, elections matter, and we need to definitely take hold of our Department of Education and put it back on the side of the people as soon as we can.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that does it for today's Do Now. And up next, we have an assessment where I'm going to tell you about students ghosting me. Stay tuned.
It's cold out there. All right, folks, for today's main segment, we have an assessment from Manuel. What do you got for us, man?
All right, so I want to tell you about a time I've been ghosted. So, Being ghosted, or having all communication with a romantic interest abruptly cut off without explanation, is a hot topic among the millennial and millennial adjacent crowds. The HBO show Insecure featured a prominent ghosting this season that set Twitter ablaze on the topic. It hurts to be ghosted. And as a teacher of high schoolers, I too have been ghosted. It certainly doesn't hurt in the same way that a romantic ghosting does, but it still hurts. I teach at a close-knit school with a rich tradition of graduates coming back to visit teachers and speak to students. In my classroom, I have a wall of photos of students from years back that I refuse to take down because so many of them return to visit. It's just what we do. Relationships at our school simply don't end at graduation. We're in the black and brown corner of a highly segregated city, and we've always been the underdogs. So we got us because nobody else out there does. But sometimes the students I'm closest to and who I most want to stay in touch with ghost me. They graduate, they say they'll stay in touch, and then nothing. No dropping by to check in, no response to my how's life after high school messages, just nothing. Over the years, I've bumped into a few of these students around the city, and the reason for their ghosting became clear. They were worried about disappointing me. We sell big dreams as teachers. College, career, be great, change the world. Although communicating these high expectations is important, we too often fail to communicate both our unconditional love for students and our understanding that everyone has their own individual path to take. Schools preach college and buzzworthy careers in STEM, but these aren't for everybody. We know this, but to what extent do we communicate it to our students? The double whammy of teachers expecting you to be great and social media fooling you into believing that everybody else has life figured out. That can make a young adult feel as if they're a failure. And when that teacher who did so much to try to prepare you for college comes calling, it can be difficult to respond, hence going ghost. I've had a few prominent ghostings in my career. I once came across a student at a local junior college who had gone off to a very prominent university after high school. When he saw me, his face froze. He clearly wasn't prepared to tell me about what he was doing taking classes at our local JC. I thought he was out of town at that big university. He explained to me that he didn't cut it at that university, and he didn't want me to know that he had to start all over at a junior college. My heart was broken, not because this phenomenal student landed back at a junior college, but because he didn't feel comfortable telling me this. Ouch. A glaring area of weakness in my teaching practice is effectively communicating the fact that I will love and support my students no matter where they end up after our time together. I know that success can look different for different people. I know that obstacles exist that set some people back. I know that some folks take longer than others to discover who they are and what they want to do in life. I know that other folks never discover what they want to do in life, but somehow find a happy fit nonetheless. I also know that many students go off to college straight from high school only to hate it and to struggle immensely. So then why am I still signaling, either directly or indirectly, that I expect my students to fit a particular model of post-secondary success? Lots of former students have hit me with, life is going great, Rustin, I'm going to go back to school soon, as if to apologize for not continuing on in education. And this, to me, is unnecessarily apologetic. It's definitely not their fault that they feel the need to reassure me in this way. It's my fault. I hate that a student of mine would ghost me on account of feeling like I'd be disappointed in them, or judge them, or lecture them about their life. Clearly, I have to revisit my messaging and face my own shortcomings with regards to how I speak to students about their futures and my hopes and dreams for them. So, to all the students who have ghosted me, please hit me back. Whatever big dreams I tried to sell you before aren't what matters now, nor are they what I care about. I just want to check up on you and make sure you're good wherever in life you may be.
Wow, man. Well, you're really just pushing my thinking with this assessment.
That's what we do on all of the above.
That's right. That's right, folks. In all seriousness, right? We're coming up on kind of the apex of college application season right now, and it's like the sprint to the January 1st deadline, or around there deadlines for most colleges across the country, and on the one hand, it's a really beautiful moment. It's the sort of procedural transition from child to adulthood, and it's the bringing into fruition the hopes and dreams. but it's also a very high pressure time period. And, some of that pressure is put on students directly from us. Some of it is themselves, putting it on, self-imposed. But you're really making me think about, in our work where, we're working in communities where there's been, achievement gaps and opportunity gaps for decades or longer,
Right.
and we are very much in the business of working to correct for those things, and we got to push and use every minute we have, with young people to be, helping them achieve their goals and hopes and dreams. But what might be the unintended cost of that push, and what's the right balance between, pushing and supporting. And so, anyways, you got my mind going today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing, though. Like, we need to set the high expectations. That's critically important, especially, like you said, for populations that have long suffered from all kinds of equity issues and haven't had the opportunity. And for sure, we want our youngsters to go off to college and achieve. But at some point, that messaging becomes so hammered in their head that a student that doesn't do that and finds himself a year removed from high school and kind of looks around and thinks like, man, what am I doing with my life? I don't know that we're really preparing them very much for that reality, that like young adult life is one that likes to throw a lot of monkey wrenches and is one that each person individually eventually has to find their own path that works for them. But that's not really what we preach in most schools. I think what we preach in most schools is, college, career. And at some point, like, we're setting folks up for a real come to terms about their own value as a 20, 21, 22-year-old who didn't go to college.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually making me think about a recent episode that kind of went viral on social media. I think back like towards the end of the summer, if memory serves. And of course, I'm forgetting his name now in the moment, but the actor who played Elvin on The Cosby Show.
Oh, yeah, right.
Who was spotted working at a Trader Joe's, and someone took a picture, put it on Twitter, and
Right.
like was
Trying to
making
shame him.
fun of him, like how the mighty have fallen type
Right.
of a thing. And he had a really fascinating interview with some of the press afterwards, where he was wearing his Trader Joe's like uniform or the badge, and really talking about like the dignity of work.
Right.
And the like he's been a internationally famous superstar actor, and he's been like a working stiff actor, and he's been the dude at Trader Joe's bagging groceries, right? And he's sort of seen the full spectrum of tremendous wealth and privilege and like regular everyday stuff. And really talked about like the dignity of work, and that one job is not necessarily better than another. It's different. It might pay more. It might have more prestige, but it's not inherently more worthy.
Right.
And I think there's an interesting kind of analogy there about education, about the path that students take. The data definitely tells us some powerful things about the likelihood that a student will finish. If they enter directly into a 4-year school versus directly into a 2-year school,
Sure.
It's pretty starkly different, right? And so there's a lot of reason to communicate to kids that like this is what the data tells us about the path that you are opening up or closing off to yourself, depending on your grades and test scores and all that, right? But there's not necessarily a superiority to one path versus the other, right? There are advantages and disadvantages, but you're not a failure because you have gone to a 2-year college, or because you have struggled and need to take an alternative path to get where you ultimately want to go. And I would hate to think that we have young people that are feeling like they can't reach out and still ask for support or be valued the same way they were. Right. Because they've had to switch paths, or because they've made a choice to do something different. I would hope that they don't feel like their worth is less in our eyes because of that.
Yeah, and interesting that you brought up the junior college and transfer and versus going directly into a 4-year college from high school point, because a few episodes ago we had Consuelo Martinez, who is currently a senior at UCLA, but she came onto our show to speak about her experience going from high school straight to a junior college, and sort of the way that she received all this negative messaging from friends and teachers about, like, as if she was setting the expectations too low for herself by not going directly into a 4-year college. And she really spoke powerfully about the negative narrative that we have about junior college, even though we won't come out and say it. I think if you step onto pretty much any high school across the U.S. that champions college and has college days where teachers and pennants and everything's showing college logos and all this and that, I'm pretty sure most of those logos and most of those t-shirts are four-year universities. And even though we might say verbally that there's nothing wrong with community college or junior college, students still get the impression that that's sort of like either the backup or not to be celebrated as highly. So that just adds to the sort of anxiety that a student might feel by sitting here at this time of year knowing that they're not applying to these top schools because they maybe don't qualify because of GPA or whatever, and they see all these other students, their friends, applying to UC this or university of whatever and feeling great about it, and they themselves are sitting there like, man, I feel like somehow I'm not doing enough or not doing it right. And that sort of inner dilemma is something that I don't think we explore very much in our day-to-day classes and lessons, and that's something that I think is definitely a room for improvement for myself, definitely, and teachers in general.
Yeah, well, I hope, maybe there's some students out there or some, adults now out there who might see this and maybe get a bit of a different perspective, right? That, we don't forget about you as your teachers. We care about you. We continue to want what's best for you. And, so stay connected, stay in touch, reach out. And who knows, maybe we can help in some way as well, so.
Yeah, I really like something that a fellow educator on Twitter mentioned about my ghosting story. When I first wrote about it, he posed the question, do we create unrealistic expectations, or do we create safe spaces for them to endure life's speed bumps? And that was from Noah Geisel. And this idea of creating these safe spaces to endure life's speed bumps, even those students who go off straight to a four-year university and are, valedictorian and all those things, like life still has these speed bumps that we know and are very well documented in terms of the number of students who exit college within the first year or exit college within, before attaining a degree. And are we really preparing them for these speed bumps? I would like to think that most of us are, in the sense of like teaching effort and teaching this idea of overcoming hardship and overcoming failure. But, I think every teacher will say that, but I don't know that it's really explicitly being taught. And I think if we more explicitly teach this idea of overcoming challenges above and beyond like what's going on during high school, I think that might do well, serve students well in terms of dealing with life's challenges in the future. So shout out Noah Geisel for posing that very powerful question.
Yeah. Well, as usual, Manuel, you leave us with a lot to think about. Great perspective. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, folks, now it's time for Class Dismissed. We want to give a very special shout out to Kentucky high schooler Allison Tu, who founded the group Stamina. Stamina is the Student Alliance for Mental Health, Innovation, and Action. And she founded this after realizing that mental health concerns at her school were largely going unnoticed and unattended to. Stamina is a network of passionate students who are dedicated to improving mental health access in their schools. And according to the publication The Week, students across Kentucky are reporting high amounts of psychological stress, anxiety, and depression, so much so that suicide is now the second leading cause of death for Kentucky youngsters. So Allison Tu isn't just talking about it, she's being about it, founding Stamina and lobbying for a greater representation of mental health professionals in U.S. schools. And actually the group that she founded, Stamina, is currently lobbying for Kentucky House Bill 604, which would require a school to have one mental health professional for every 1,500 students. One for every 1,500, still probably not enough, but big improvement over what the system currently provides. So big up to Allison Tu and all of her fellow students who are working hard on this issue.
Yeah, congrats, Allison. I think it's really great. There's so much tribalism in in our politics. It's great to see a youngster in a red state, really taking on these important issues that people need help with, like mental health. It's got nothing to do with partisan politics. It's not a partisan issue. Mental health is one of those things that people need, and Allison's helping folks get that service. So props, Allison, too.
Indeed.
All right. Folks, we have one correction for you today. Earlier in today's episode, I mentioned that the Thomas B. Fordham Institute's report about grade inflation stated that 1/3 of students who received a letter B grade in their class scored proficient on their end of class exams. It's actually the opposite. 2/3 scored proficient on their end of class exams, and 1/3 did not score proficient. So the larger point still stands. We have an issue with grade inflation that's worth discussing, but the problem is not as bad as I made it seem earlier. So apologies for that.
Fake news, man. Fake news.
Fake news.
Man.
Your organization's terrible.
All right, folks.
Trump
Thank you
humor.
for tuning in to the second episode of season 2 of All of the Above. Please remember to subscribe and share this far and wide, and stay tuned for another edition of All of the Above coming at you very soon.